stimulate that feeling of let's get out there and do things. Active social life is tied with, is also consistent and well-maintained routine, so that takes practice over time. And it's also the thing that keeps us resilient to make sure that as life changes around us, which can happen at any time for any of us, that those transitions are managed with more resiliency. And it's never too late to learn ways to engage. So what do we know about engagement? What do we know about this? We also know that whoever we are, or however we live, that there's certain, and however our physical health is, all interchanges into those risks for social isolation that we have to pay attention to. Because the opposite of social engagement means we're lonely, we don't feel like we belong anywhere, we have few social contacts, we have few quality relationships and fulfilling relationships, and therefore our engagement around things and our willingness to engage around things become a little less. But that situation of isolation breeds some real serious risks that have been proven in research. Medical research tells us that people die earlier who are not engaged. That's a fact. That people die from all causes of mortality earlier. We see people rehospitalized more frequently who are less engaged. The risk of institutionalization rises with isolation. Cardiac heart disease, strokes are more frequent, so chronic, massive chronic disease episodes become more frequent. Cancer mortality. 1 in 3 people in this country will have experience with cancer. It's becoming a chronic disease for many of us, which is sometimes manageable, but we know people survive longer and survive better. Oh, I'm sorry, can you hear me? I tend to mumble. I'm from New York, so I talk fast. So give me a heads up if you don't hear me. I don't mind. Our nutritional risk, what we just had the pleasure of hearing for, is greater when there's isolation, which I think you outlined really well. And negative health behaviors, increase of drinking, increase of smoking, happens when we're alone and we don't have outside attachments. What I didn't know until I did some of this research is that common colds are more frequent for people who are alone. So we tend to think that we can get more colds because we're outside and about with other people, but the opposite is true, which I thought was interesting. Less adherence to medical programs. Like if we have a chronic disease and we're taking certain medications, we have to follow some protocol. That adherence to that plan is often less when we're alone. Falls, which we'll hear about soon, and there's also cognitive decline. People have more risk of cognition changes when we are not socially engaged. That's a proven fact. Also, there's always a greater risk of suicide and of course, episodes of depression. So those are real facts that kind of make us wake up and say, whoa, okay, maybe I should pay a little more attention to the people around me, and it's a proven fact that is an investment worth making. But why are other reasons that people feel isolated? And this is more a subjective thing. When you ask, and ARP just did our research that I had a nice slide, but we don't have a place, so it is going to be on the website, but it looks like that. But if you ask people why do they feel more isolated, and I think it's interesting to note, of course, that 48% feel that their friends and family are too far away, or that 42% feel that their friends and family may be a little bit too busy to include them into your plans. But 29% feel that they don't have adequate access to technology to find out what's going on, and they don't have a computer. And 17% feel that the car, not having a car, access to car, and 10% feeling there's no public transportation. But we have a lot of public transportation in the urban area. Sometimes it's not as accessible as it needs to be, or as senior-friendly as it needs to be, or too expensive. And 13% of people are invested in caregiving responsibilities, like caring for their grandchildren or for an ill family member or friend that causes them to feel a lot more isolated. And 12% cite that they have some physical challenges that make it hard. So it's important to understand those realities, because as we look at things in our environment, in our city, we need to think about what makes it more aging-friendly so that we can continue to invest in our social relationships. So having adequate transportation, having houses that are accessible and visitable, neighbors who have houses that you can get into and out of as things change in life. But there are other things to keep in mind too that may make it hard for people to continue to invest. And we need to make sure that we're open to helping people with these issues. Vision and hearing. So many people do not tend to their hearing, do not get their hearing checked. And yet we know that it's people with hearing loss, 27% of them are more isolated than the norm. So that tells you that we oftentimes think it's too embarrassing to wear a hearing aid, or I don't want to do that, or it's important to check that and to get that, to feel okay, that it's okay to have this corrected so that you can maintain adequate connection with people. How am I doing so far? Are you with me? Okay. I don't want to underscore the issue of depression. That's what I spend a lot of my time dealing with. And depression is an illness that is not age-related. So becoming depressed is not a natural consequence of growing older. And therefore, there are supports and there are treatment that is very effective and helps people to see things in a different frame of mind. And depression and isolation are a killer. And it's a tragedy because only 3% of older people actually use traditional mental health resources. And I think that's probably less from the LGBT community. So it's a tragedy that we don't invest in. Most people seek help from their doctors, but doctors don't always connect with the community resources that help really deal with the rehabilitation issue and help people get back on track. But we do know that as people tend to the more psychological supports, they do feel better. We do see with greater social support, we increase the quality of life, help them engage better into things around them. So it is something to understand that if one starts to feel blue, being blue is, if it's temporary, short-lived, that's something. Bereavement is also a normal part of living. But when bereavement becomes more complicated and more prolonged, those are things that need attention and to really seek out for that help. Transitions in life cause us sometimes to have more difficulty. I see retirement as one of those big transitional times. You're giving up a sense of self that's really a part of living and your work and your community, your relationships at work. And so it's important to note that retirement can cause those kinds of feelings of isolation, loss, caregiving, and changes in family dynamics. When your one retires and the other partner's home, changes your family life, and sometimes those things need some little tweaking and some kind of thinking about what is life looking like for us today. But it's important to note that 1 in 3, that the report from the SAGE report that just came out, 1 in 3, 34% of LGBT older people live alone. And as we talked about, living alone is a very important risk factor. And so 40% of older people who identify as LGBT tell us that their support networks have become smaller over time. And that's compared with 27% of folks at large. So it's important for us to think about what this means. Oh boy, I lost my place. Give me a second. Sorry. So, why we should engage. We talked about the negative things. I just want to put out there that it's important to understand that as we engage, we reduce our physical and cognitive health issues. We have slower progression of health declines, become more motivated to maintain health, and then less engaged peers. We tend to know more about health information and get better health information, more accurate health information because of our engagement. Older people who report more social engaged report feeling better, less functionally disabled. Now, the other thing to say is that we can start to increase the social activity at any age of life. I challenge you in